All throughout Scottish history, there are tales and legends of nightmarish beasts, bloody battles and noble warriors, but a more in-depth look would show that the ancient people of Scotland had to overcome many of the trials we still face today. One struggle that has affected every civilization throughout all time is young love, the last swan of Dun Ghallain. Far to the west, in Lochaber, lies the picturesque Loch Sunart, and upon its northern shore sits the great Iron Age fort of Dun Ghallain. It was thought that the fort was held by a branch of the Clan Stewart, which ruled many of the western lands. This tale centres around the son of a local chieftain and a poor crofter's daughter. The young Stewart and heir to Dun Ghallain had met a beautiful young maid by the banks of Loch Sunart early one morning. As is the way with young romantics, Stewart fell madly in love with the maid as soon as he laid eyes upon her. The girl was washing clothes in the water as the young Scotsman approached. That day, a spark was ignited between the pair, and they agreed to meet by the loch every morning, and there the relationship would flourish. It took a while longer for the young maid to admit her feelings for the Stewart. It was not that she did not love him, but because she knew that they could never be together. She and her family were constantly occupied by the hardship and toil of their daily lives. They would tend the land and care for some animals, but were never more than one bad season from a torturous poverty. Many of the local villagers were the same. They would toil for subsistence and make a meagre living. It was unthought of that a person of such stature would marry the leader of a clan, a member of nobility. So against her better judgment, the maid continued to meet with the young Stewart. One evening, the pair met on the banks of the loch, and the young noble spoke to the maid. "Your beauty is more than the stars on the loch," he said. "Your raven hair and ivory skin make you more of a queen than any other I have seen. I wish to tell my parents that we shall marry. That is, of course, if you will have me." The maiden's heart jumped for joy. For the many months they had known each other, she had always dreamt of this moment. Yet there was still a dark shadow of doubt in her mind. "I love you," she declared. "I always have. But I am a crofter's daughter, and you are a chieftain's son. Let me work longer at my home, so I can gather enough money and gifts for a dowry. Then your parents could not refuse us." "I would grant you anything," called the Stewart, "but I know my parents. I love you, I have loved you, and will love you, till my dying breath, and they will too. I shall tell them tonight. Worry not, there will be no issue." For the remainder of the evening, the young couple sat by the bank, overlooking the beauty of the loch, and imagining how wonderful their future would be together. It was precisely the kind of dream that can only be dreamt by those without the restriction of age or love lost. That night, the young Scotsman went to his parents. The chief and his wife had known of their son's affection for a local woman, but they did not yet know who she was. The boy's mother was of high noble blood, more so than the clan chief. She dreamt that her son would marry a noble's daughter, which in her opinion was the only way to protect the village, the lands, and Dun Ghallain itself. For only those of noble blood truly have the power and right to rule. The young Stewart told his parents of the crofter's daughter that he had fallen in love, and that she was strong, kind, and generous, all qualities fit for a ruler. He begged of his parents to grant their blessing to the couple, for they were to marry. Both the chief and his wife were taken aback by the news. This girl knew nothing of leadership. She had no education and was of no wealth. The boy's mother, now heartbroken, flew into a devastating fury. "You shall not marry this girl while I draw breath," she screamed. "You are forbidden to see her or talk with her again. You are a foolish child who does not comprehend the weight of this decision. No son of mine will wed a crofter's daughter." With this, the boy fell to his knees, looking as though a blade had pierced his very soul. He attempted to defend his beloved and beseeched his mother to reconsider, but she would not hear a word of it. The young Stewart left the castle that night, broken and defeated. He returned to the banks of the loch in hope of an answer to his troubles. By the next morning, the young Scotsman had put together a simple plan. He was of course now forbidden to meet his beloved as usual, so he decided that he would take his bow and simply tell his mother that he was hunting at the loch. Somewhere deep in the boy's heart, he believed that his mother would eventually come round and bless the marriage. It would just take some time. This would continue for a while. Every day the boy would leave Dun Ghallain and head to the loch, where he would, in secret, meet his love. While there, he would hunt deer, duck or swan, for he had to return each day with some game as the spoils of his hunt. But after a time, the boy's mother became suspicious of his daily hunting trips, and on one morning decided to follow him. He left Dun Ghallain and headed to the woods as his mother followed. He reached the bank of the loch and was united with his love. The woman in the trees now knew that her son had disobeyed her. The fury and anger in the woman's heart quickly turned to desperation and ruthlessness. She knew of one way to completely end this foolish marriage. The chieftain's wife left the young couple by the banks of the loch and headed far into the deepest depths of the wood. In the village, there had always been hushed whispers of the witch from the woods. It was said that deep in the woods, just north of SALEN village, there lived a witch, and that she could make any wish come true. Stories told over the years mentioned that the witch had saved the life of a child, put an end to a husband's violence, and made one old woman incredibly wealthy. The witch from the woods would always ask a high price for her skills, and it wasn't only coin. On some occasions, the witch would ask for personal items of sentimental value, and of course there were always those desperate enough to pay. It was to this very witch that the chief's wife now ran. For many hours the noble woman ran through the woods, calling for the old mother. When she was at her wit's end and exhausted from her run, she sat beneath a tree for rest. When suddenly a wizened old woman emerged from her surroundings. The small woman seemed of a feral nature, clad in moss and bark. "People seek my help during times of depression," said the witch in an eerie tone. "Your people are well, there is no plague or famine, so why do you call me?" "My son is lost," spoke the noble woman. "He has been tricked by a girl from the village. I wish my son to never again see that girl. Do all in your power to grant me this wish." The witch stood in silence for some time. Eventually she spoke in the same strange tone as before. "A curse of this magnitude requires a hefty toll. Are you prepared to pay?" "Anything," called the woman. "I will give you anything you desire to rid me of the girl. Now tell me what I owe you." "Simple," said the witch. "Equivalent exchange. You will give me that which you hold most dear. A fitting trade, as it is that you will take from your son." The item the witch required was the woman's beautiful cloak. It was a family heirloom and passed down through many generations of noble women. The chief's wife had one day hoped to hand it to her daughter-in-law. To part with such a precious item was difficult for the woman, but her rage at this point was all-consuming. She would have sacrificed much more to rid her life of the crofter's daughter. The woman left the witch in the woods and made the long journey back to Dun Ghallain. She was unsure what the next day would bring, but hoped her wish would be fulfilled. Early the next morning, the crofter's daughter awoke to begin her daily chores. But her father, taking pity on the girl, told her to take the day off and visit the one she loves. He knew of the marriage proposal and of how hard the young woman had been working to prepare a dowry for the clan chief. It was this random act of kindness that led the young woman to arrive by the banks of the loch early. She went to the pair's usual meeting spot and waited for the noble youth to appear. Unknown to her, the witch was watching from the tree line and began to conjure her wicked spell. The maid was startled by a guttural screech, but before she could turn round, her body started to warp and change. Her outstretched arms grew dazzling white feathers as her body was reduced in size. Eventually, standing upon the bank of the loch was a magnificent ivory-coloured swan. With her evil deed complete, the witch returned to the darkness of the forest and left the bewildered swan by the water. It was about this time that the young Stewart readied his bow and headed off to meet his beloved. But when he arrived at the loch, there was no one there. The young man waited and waited. His only company, a great white swan, which sat close to the bank. As night began to fall, the Scotsman thought something must have happened to the girl, or perhaps she did not love him as he did her. He decided to return to Dun Ghallain, but first he would need a beast to return with, to show his suspicious mother that he truly had been hunting all day. The only creature in sight was the swan. It would make quite the prize for any hunter. The young man drew his bow and loosed an arrow. That day his sight was true, and the point of the arrow found the heart of the swan. But as the now blood-stained bird lay dying, its figure returned to that of the woman. He ran to her side, his mind reeling. He now understood why he had not seen her at the loch. Horror-stricken to see what he had done, the young Stewart became overwhelmed with grief, drew his dagger, and took his own life. The bodies of the man and the maiden sank into the water, never to be seen again. The mother's wish was granted, and the pair would never marry. It is said that they still lay hand in hand on the bottom of the loch to this very day. And from that day to this, no swan has ever returned to Loch Sunart. An interesting tale of superiority, ego, and a warning to be careful what you wish for. Like many of the old tales, there are multiple versions told all throughout Scottish history. The earliest was known as the Swan of SALEN, and told of a clan chief who fell in love with a low-born maiden. The loch and Dun Ghallain are not mentioned in this early version. As the years went by, the story would become more romanticised, in keeping with the times. Names were given to the characters, depending on where the tale was told. Sometimes the main roles would switch. In the tale The Swans on the Loch, recorded in George Macpherson's Highland Myths and Legends, the boy was the greatest hunter in the village, and his beloved was the daughter of a clan chief. In this more modern interpretation, the old witch of the wood was completely removed, and the young girl's mother was a powerful enchantress. There was also no location specified. The loch is known only by the Dark Loch, and there is no mention of a castle or fort. The concept of magic users turning people into swans is not novel in mythology. The Brothers Grimm recorded a Germanic fairy tale called The Six Swans, in which 6 brothers are turned into swans by their evil stepmother, and could only become free if a maiden wove them clothes made from nettles. In Japan, there's the tale of a fisherman who found a magnificent robe made of white feathers. It belonged to a nature goddess who removed it to bathe, and when she left the hot spring, the fisherman gladly returned her robe to her, and the beautiful woman transformed into a great white bird and flew away. In Romania, there's the tale of the Swan Maiden and the King. In Russia, the tale of the White Duck, and many more from all around the world. I think the most similar tale comes from Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, in which the Princess Odette is enchanted by a dark wizard to spend the day as a swan and only return to her human form at night. Prince Siegfried unexpectedly meets the young princess and falls madly in love. Eventually the Dark Wizard tries to force the prince to marry his own daughter, but the prince refuses and claims he would rather die with Odette than marry someone he does not love. This act breaks the wizard's curse, but the young couple sadly drown in the lake. When asked about his influences for Swan Lake, Tchaikovsky noted many of the Swan Maiden tales from all over Europe as inspiration for his work, but no one in particular. Perhaps the spirit of the Swan of Dun Ghallain lives on through his work. Thank you for listening.